I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. When we last looked at our Windows Virtual Desktop environment, we discussed user profiles, and we talked about how we could leverage the FSLogix in order to centrally manage those profiles so that every system that you log on to, you would get a consistent user profile and desktop and settings experience. Even if you logged on a server in America today, got on a plane, flew halfway around the world, and then you logged on again, you would have the same experience. So that was a pretty good solution, but we just had a single file server. Now, that in itself has a problem. Problem is it's not highly available. It's not protected by disaster recovery, and we didn't talk about how to protect it with backups. So want to discuss some of that today. Now I want to preface this with the fact that Windows Virtual Desktop is in preview, okay? And what preview basically is going to mean in this case is that the solution has not necessarily been fully vetted by all of the other technologies that we're going to be talking about today for making a HA and DR type solution to protect our file shares. So with that said, some of the possibilities are you could just have a file server cluster. So having a file cluster means that our file server is now made highly available. The data is stored on two different systems at least. And because of that, now if one of them goes down, we don't necessarily lose all of our data. Now with a file server cluster like scale out file server, some of the other performance benefits of a file cluster is that we could make the underlying disk highly available as well. In our example in our last video, we had two disks that were in Windows storage spaces that we made a pool out of. So that's two disks behind our file share. Now that's okay, but that may not be performant enough, and that may not be highly available enough. So for better performance and high availability, you could make the underlying storage pool storage spaces direct, which would give you more disks, better performance options, and more high availability of the underlying disk. So that's certainly a good recommendation. So now we have two layers of protection in our system. So a alternative to that, or in addition to that, I will propose in this video that we talk about Azure Files Sync. Now we've discussed Azure Files Sync in a previous video on the Azure Academy already, so we have a whole video on what it is and how to leverage it. So if you don't know how to set up AFS, I suggest you go watch our other video on the Azure Academy. Benefit of this is, let's say that you have regionally located file servers for your tenant host groups so that people can log on to resources closer to where they are. Say you have some users in India and other users in America. So you want to have a local file server for them so that they can access their resources closest to wherever they are located, as well as session hosts, so that you don't have to have all of your profiles stored centrally in the UK, right? So it makes the logon process much faster for everybody. So having local file servers is great, but there is one problem, and that is that within the share that's over in Germany, India, the UK, wherever that is, they're all on servers. And those servers either then need to also have file server clusters, scale out file servers, storage spaces direct, all of those things. Now, the problem with that is when they then move and they take their machine with them somewhere else in the world, they still have to connect back to that share because that's where their profile is. So we get around this by using DFS. DFS, or the distributed file system, is basically where we're going to take a contiguous single namespace globally that will then also hit the local server from wherever they are. So let me show you what I mean. So here's my domain controller, and you see I have the DFS management console set up here, and here are my two different namespaces. And a namespace is where you have whack domain name or server name whack share. For each one of these, I have two servers that are in this namespace, and you can see that one is located in East US, one is located in West US 2. So each one of these servers is behind the namespace. So depending on where you are, you would want to hit East or West US 2, and of course you can add others for other locations around the world. This is all based on Active Directory sites and services, where we enter all the different subnets for our environment, and then we attach those subnets to particular site. I've got one IP range in West US 2 and two in East US. When you're building this structure out, you've got to have this part in play so that when someone is in West US 2, in my case, you want them to hit the local server, and it's only only going to do that if you have AD sites and services set up so that the servers are located by subnet geographically, tied to an AD site, which then relates to how DFS will talk to that system. So here's the current data within the WVD profiles namespace. And this is all of the logins that are using FSLogix to centrally store their profiles. Now, these are all on 2 servers, as we saw in the DFS management console. So let me show you those. All right, so these are my 2 file servers, and you can see that these both have FWAC DFS roots WAC WVD profiles as the local location where the files are stored. So when it comes to DFS, DFS does have its own replication engine, but that would still mean one server talking to another server. One goes down, now we've got a problem. We have to replicate the whole namespace again to another server. Where Azure File Sync comes in, like we saw in the graphic, all the data lives in the cloud. And because it's all in the cloud, spinning up another server to be part of our Azure File Sync group is very quick and easy. So if now we stand up another location in Japan, all I have to do is build that server in Japan, install the agent, attach it to the sync group, and then it's going to get all the replicated data. And then you do the part to set it up in DFS to add a namespace server, which is just install the DFS role and then attach it to this particular namespace. So let's look at the Azure portal. So here we are. I've got a specific resource group for AFS, and you can see I've got server 0 in East US and server 1 is in West US 2. And then we have our Azure Files Sync service. And within there, we have 2 sync groups. So this is the one for Windows Virtual Desktop, and there's our 2 servers, and they are replicating all the data, no current issues or errors, pointing at that local storage path. So what's happened, and again, if you're unfamiliar, go back and watch our AFS video, but we've set up the Azure File Sync agent, and we've told it that we want this particular path to be the one that Azure File Sync is going to replicate the data to. So we're not using DFS replication. We're using Azure File Sync to replicate the data. And that way the data is all stored in the cloud centrally, and it's all stored in this storage account under files. And here's our WVD share, and there is all of the data. Okay, so whenever someone logs in, and here's our 2 session hosts. You can see I've got the task manager up so we can see what users are logged in. Currently, there are none. Then what we will expect is after the connections are made and the session has been allowed, the user will log in. The disk will mount from our DFS share for whatever the user is. That will get mounted to the local file system, where then the 2 folders will be mounted, the username and the local underscore username for the settings. They'll be mounted, do whatever they want to do. And then after they close their session on the session host, data will be then backed up to Azure File Sync. And so let's see this process in action. Okay, so here we are logged on to the RD web page, and I'm going to kick off our session. And this time we'll log in as Thor. And as you can see, we've got the profile now mounted. Thor is logging on to this particular VM. There's our local and our local underscore Thor. And if we look back at our desktop, you see, yes, indeed, we are logged in as Thor. And then when you're done, you can sign out. Now, one thing I want to show you before we sign out of there is, let's open up the disk manager. And you can see mounted on the local file system is that disk from profile-Thor. And this refers to the FSLogix share that gets mounted locally as a virtual hard drive. And from there is where these 2 folders come from. Okay, so that's how you can see the complete path here. So now we've got ourselves logged on. Let's look at the share here. So the last change was made on 4/21 at 12:32 a.m. Currently it's 4/22 at 1:44 p.m. So let's see what happens when we log off. And we look at our session host server. The connection has been closed. The disk is unmounted. And we look at the disk, and the Thor disk has been modified. So let's look at the portal again. And we see that the Azure File Sync has updated the share. So now 4/22, 1:44 p.m. is when that data was then pushed up to Azure Files. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at how to protect your Windows file shares and how to make them highly available through many possibilities, including file cluster, scale out file servers behind which is storage spaces or storage spaces direct. And also FSLogix has their own highly available reliable solution for your storage, which you can dig into more on their site, as well as Azure File Sync to protect your file system and make them highly available and globally redundant. So if this video was good, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the Azure Academy. And while you're at it, click that notification icon so that you can get an email when our new videos come out, which is roughly once a week. And give us a comment below as to which of the highly available features you prefer going forward with Windows Virtual Desktop and anything else that you're interested in going forward. Happy learning.